Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer Podcast. We've got another exciting guest today. I have Sheriff Andy Hughes, and I know he's retired, but we'll call him Sheriff anyway. And Andy, great to have you on the show.
Hey, great to be here, Patrick. Sheriff's one of those titles you can't get rid of, even if you wanted to, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like chief, retired chief, former chief. I don't know. I pretty much answer to anything, especially if you say it loud enough, right?
Right.
So, this is going to be a fun conversation. We had a great chat a few weeks ago as we were prepping for the show, and today I think we can look at this as an evolution of policing, and you've got a ton of experience, and I think the audience will get a lot out of not just your past experience, but what you're doing today in order to help build the next generation of policing. So why don't you give us a little bit of the origin story? You started young at 18.
Yeah. Let me go back a little bit further than that.
All right.
I was born in a Salvation Army home for unwed mothers, and was left there, was in foster care for a period of time, and was adopted 6 months later by Dothan, Alabama police detective and his wife. And my parents are Billy Ray and Marie Hughes. And man, I tell you what, it was a true blessing. And I believe that, the Lord has always had a purpose in my life, and that purpose was to be a law enforcement officer. I was placed in that law enforcement home. But yeah, I'm a second generation lawman. My father was an officer for 36 years, so I'm second generation. Started whenever I was 18 years old as a dispatcher with the Houston County, Alabama Sheriff's Office. Later on, worked in the jail. Ended up going back to dispatch for a little while, and then went on the road as a patrol deputy in 1988. Later worked narcotics there at the Sheriff's Office for a period of time, and then made the decision to go over to the Dothan Police Department in 1990. Dothan PD was a larger agency with more chances for advancement and more training opportunities and opportunities to be on specialty teams and that kind of thing. I thought it was a good career move. Stayed there for 16 and a half years of my 30-year career. And in 2006, I ran for sheriff in Houston County and was successful, and ran again and was reelected again in 2010. And then in 2014, the state of Alabama was consolidating 12 different law enforcement agencies into one big agency called ALEA, or the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency. And I was tapped to fill a slot there at the Capitol in Montgomery as the Assistant Director for Homeland Security. And in that role, I served as a Tactical Operations Commander and was I was the Chief of Tactical Operations over SWAT, EOD, and aviation for the state of Alabama for a period of about a couple of years, and retired in 2016 after 30 years of service. And I've been working in the private sector ever since.
So you haven't done much in your career.
I've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate to have the law enforcement career that I had. There's a lot of law enforcement officers out there that have had much more fulfilling and better careers and done a lot more stuff than I have. But I do feel very fortunate to have had the career that I had, doing something that I enjoyed immensely, and I miss it every single day.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I want to start and go back there at 18, working as a dispatcher, son of a police officer. So you grew up around it. We don't get the younger, like that 18 to 22, and maybe I think some states are probably a little bit different. They might require you to be 21 before you can work in dispatch, but just don't see the number of people with that level of interest at that young of age anymore. I don't know if you see the same thing down in your part of the country there in the South, but started noticing that really 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it is that way. There's not as much interest anymore. I think a lot of a lot of kids are more focused on a dollar and than they are on public service. People are just not as public service minded as they used to be at one time. I think some of that generation's gone, and the internet has changed a lot of that. You see social media with these people that are famous, and they're showing their, what they've done, and they made all this big money, and they're driving fancy cars, and they've got this certain lifestyle, and you're not going to get that as being a cop. My dad used to tell me, he said, "So why they call us police?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we're the poorest men in town and the least thought of." and that's pretty much the way it is, And cops don't make a whole lot of money, and the wages are better today, and they've become even better just because of the competitiveness of trying to attract law enforcement officers today. But it's not a job that you're going to get rich in. You can make a decent living in a lot of agencies. There are some agencies that are still paying cops $12, $14 an hour to risk their lives on a daily basis. But you've got to have a servant's heart to want to be a law enforcement officer. You really do. And I always say in the presentation I do, I always say, chase your purpose and not a paycheck, and it'll definitely be more fulfilling.
Yeah, and that's so important for what we're asking police officers to do, because it really, you really are giving a lot of yourself in this job. There's a lot of, you're not dealing with people on their best days. You're dealing with people in crisis, and quite frankly, when they need you the most is when you're there for them as well. So it's not a job that pays great financially, but there are a lot of rewards that come with it. And I think it'll be interesting here in the next 5 to 10 years, because most of the country doesn't realize the crisis that we're in terms of recruitment and retention and bringing new talent into the profession. And we're going to find out the hard way, I think, unfortunately, before we're kind of willing to invest. And we see this really with the teaching profession right now as well. Like, teaching is a very similar calling, and it's generally not a job that people have entered into to get rich, but there is far greater rewards than the financial rewards that you get with it. But you also have to be able to pay your bills, and you have to be able to take care of your family, so that there's a balance there.
Going back to what you said about dealing with people on their worst days, one of my police chiefs that I work for, one of the things that he said was, there's only two kind of people that we deal with in law enforcement: bad people and good people who are having a bad day. Whether their child is lost, or their lawnmower's been stolen, or they've been in a vehicular accident, whatever the case may be. But there's only two kinds of people we deal with, and that's true: bad people and good people who are having a bad day. And we see a lot of people that at their worst, something's happened to them, something very traumatic. It's things that cops see on a daily basis, and we become desensitized to. We're immune to. Sometimes to feelings that the general public would have when something happens to them. But, that's where we have to have empathy. We've got to put ourselves in those people's place and try to help them the best we can. And the cops see a lot of stuff and experience a lot of internal and mental and emotional trauma, sometimes even if they don't realize it. But it is a very rewarding job. And, some of the situations that I've been in, and I've been involved in some bigger investigations and stuff like that, and very satisfying to arrest a number of people at the end of those investigations and put some really bad people in jail and that kind of thing. But some of the best times I've ever had, though, is helping someone to find a lost child, or helping someone to find their elderly parent with dementia, or helping someone, that's down on their luck, get to where they need to be, or get the resources that they need to get. And I always used to tell my cops, listen, never tell anybody that's not my job, or that's not our job. It may not be in our job description as law enforcement officers to do certain things, but it is our job to help. We're the ones out there that people call when they don't know who else to call. So, we need to make sure that we're helping people, whether taking them to somewhere else to get the resources they need to get help, or we're putting them in the back of our patrol car and giving them a ride, or taking them to a bus station or to the rescue mission, or whatever the case may be. And we have that duty to do that. And it just really eats me up if I ever hear a cop say, well, that's not my job to do that. Well, it may not be, but it's your job to find somebody whose job it is and help these people.
And the finding the lost child, finding the missing adult, the silver alerts, amber alerts, those are instant rewards. And in policing, a lot of times you don't get to see the positive side of your work. You really don't. You get mired down in long investigations if you're working as a detective. Sometimes as a patrol officer, it's kind of the work can get to be a little bit like Groundhog Day, kind of same people, same types of issues over and over again. And so it is, you do have to enjoy those moments when you do get those wins, because that is very satisfaction. There's a lot of satisfaction that comes with that. It kind of connects you back to your purpose. Like, ask anybody why, when they wrote down on their application, why do you want to be a police officer? Right. It's, in their mind, they may be thinking, I want to drive fast, shoot guns, and put bad people in jail. But always on paper, it's I want to help. I want to make a difference in my community, and sometimes you get to do the former while you're doing the latter. But those anymore policing, it's not like it used to be. And we'll get to that in a second. But I also think it's important to focus on what you said, because that's not my job. Our reputations oftentimes as police officers can be damaged by those that have that type of mentality. And I do have a little bit of empathy for people that give that response, because I normally think that's it's a defense mechanism. Like, and I think that's when you find yourself, and this for the officers that are out there, if you find yourself thinking that and saying that a little bit more than you ever used to, then it's time for a break. It's time, you need to take some time off, and you need to find an opportunity to grab a little solitude and recover a little bit, because that's generally, I think that's one of those signs where you're getting a little emotionally dysregulated. Time to recharge the batteries in whichever way you can do.
And cops, we don't always know what to do in situations that are outside of a law enforcement response. Well, even if you don't know, let's call somebody, call a supervisor, call a fellow officer, call somebody outside of the agency to say, hey, I've got these people here. They've got 2 young kids. They have nowhere to stay. Their car's broken down. They don't have any money, whatever the case may be. You don't just walk off and leave those people sitting beside the highway, right, because you think it's not your job. It's not within our function, as the old cliche says, to protect and to serve. We're there to do both, and to put bad guys in jail and drive fast and have fun and do some fun training and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah, if a cop tells you that it's all about people and they don't enjoy the fun stuff, they're telling you a lot too. There is a lot of fun in law enforcement, and it's a different job today than it has been in the past. But all the exciting stuff is very rewarding also.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting times, and I think maybe we can go back a little bit and then to come back forward, because we're seeing this push and all this discussion about reimagining the police. And when you ask the average person, and I've had a few people that have said, it's time to reimagine, and my first question is always, tell me what that means. What does it mean to reimagine the police in your mind? And I haven't had anyone that can really explain it yet. They'll say things that sound good, kind of sound bites, like maybe they've heard on the news or they've read. Well, we need to have more crisis intervention. We need to, think about the ways that we're dealing with the mentally ill, people that are struggling with addiction. And it's like, yep. you realize that we do all those things already, and we've evolved tremendously in the last 30 years about how we approach that problem. But then you have to go back to the origins. Hey, does anyone understand, or do you understand why police officers are getting called to the scene of a mentally ill person in crisis in the first place? At what point did the police become responsible for those problems? Have you ever had those conversations with people?
Yeah, and usually when we get called about a subject that's mentally ill, it's because the individual has not taken their medication, or their family members have not given their medication, or there's been some kind of trigger that set them off. But the thing a lot of people need to realize is that when law enforcement deals with a mental patient, a mentally ill person, we're not dealing with them in a clinical setting. We're dealing with them in real time, in the streets. There are other people around that may also be in danger. You're trying to take this person maybe into custody for evaluation without trying to hurt them. But on the other hand, they're trying to hurt you because they just don't know any better because of their mental illness. So there's a lot of factors as far as cops dealing with mentally ill people. And I agree with having mental health professionals, if you have time, to get them on site and to talk to these people and to try to use their professional, insight to come to some resolution. But usually things are not happening in that manner. It's fast paced. It's evolving very quickly, and maybe somebody's going to be hurt. I've talked to a lot of mental patients before, and cops, you see a lot of cops out here screaming commands and doing this thing and that. And, you got multiple cops screaming commands, and they're screaming different commands. And you've got a person that's already mentally ill, and then it's confusing them. It's upsetting the family members or the neighbors that are there also. And we need to teach cops how to recognize mental illness, and to recognize autism, and to recognize other disabilities that may inhibit somebody's ability to think rationally, and how we might can intervene in those.
Yeah, and I think we've done a really good job of that. Maybe not necessarily because we wanted to as a profession. I think there's always that element there, but I think it's been it's kind of one of those issues that's been forced on the police. Why? Well, because at the federal level, we stopped funding for treatment facilities, and then states followed suit. And so when people say, well, maybe institutionalization isn't the right answer for a lot of these things, we can do outpatient care, which is a more humane way of dealing with these types of people in crisis. And I agree with that. But when you create those rules, but then you don't have a safety net in place for, okay, well, how are you going to manage the problem when you do have someone that's in an outpatient environment that's no longer compliant, that's not taking their medications, where the family or the caregivers are no longer being responsible for them? Where does that fall? Right? Those are the people that the police are dealing with. And I think if you don't think that there's numbers there, right? Drive down any downtown street or any downtown area in America today and look at your homeless population, and see what that's doing, because that's what the population is. It's not, these are not, there is a segment of our homeless populations that choose to be that way, but most of them are, they're down on their luck. They are dealing with most likely some type of undiagnosed or untreated mental illness, maybe, and then generally that's what leads to some significant substance abuse issues, which then leads to interactions with the criminal justice system. And so, yeah, it's a societal issue that creates a lot of this interaction and this tension with the police. And then, the challenge is that the police then are being judged on outcomes for what's happening downstream, rather than us as a society sometimes taking a reimagined look at, well, what does managing our homeless population look like?
And it's a very fine double-edged sword there that we're teetering on. One, to serve that mentally ill person and to try to get them the help that they need, and on the other hand, protecting the public also.
Yeah, and there's some great organizations out there. The NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness. They put on great training with the CIT training, the crisis intervention training. But I also think that people have to remember that there's a limit to what we should expect from a street officer and the level of professional response, because we're not clinicians. And if you expect us to be clinicians, then you're going to have to train us to be clinicians, and then you're going to have to pay officers. So in addition to being a clinician, you're also a law enforcement officer, and there's also risks. So that's that comes into the second part of the equation when people talk about defunding. Well, defunding isn't the answer. It's actually investment that requires a change in the way that we think about how we're going to train and prepare. And again, I don't want to take us down too far off of a tangent, but I wanted to kind of set that stage before we go back a little bit, because some of the the story that you have, I think, it resonates really, I think, across America in terms of what's at the heart of policing, and that's finding the good people that care about their community, that want to make a difference. And you were telling me a story about one of the sheriffs that you used to work for, and he came up and back in the old school days where in his young days he was chasing moonshiners around, and you're driving, you're in pursuits where you get to shoot out the tires. Well, I don't think we see that very often today, do we?
No, that's really not a technique that's trained upon these days or recommended. But I first started back in 1986. The sheriff that I worked for, his name was Lamar Haddon. Almost nobody called him that, though. His name that everybody knew him by was Bird Dog, and he had been a liquor agent with the state of Alabama. Spent a career hunting moonshiners and setting up on moonshine stills and chasing drug traffickers and that kind of thing and all. And so he was a sheriff that he would come in the mornings with his coat and tie on and do his public stuff, and then after lunch he'd go home and put his blue jeans on, and when I worked narcotics, he would stay out working with us till midnight, 2:00 in the morning or whatever, go home, get a few hours of sleep, and be right back in the office the next morning. But many times, and he spoke really, really slow and really deliberate, and never really got excited. And been in chases before where be pull alongside the offender there, and they were trying to get away from us, and he'd real slow to say, "Hey, Andy Hughes." I'd say, "Yes, Sheriff." He'd say, "Won't you see if you can let a little air out of that tire?" "Okay, Sheriff." And he meant for you to shoot the tire out of the vehicle we were chasing, to disable them. So I got a taste of some old school stuff back then. When I first started in patrol with the sheriff's office, we didn't have portable radios. That was back in the day when you were out on a traffic stop or something high risk. You left your window down, pulled that old Motorola microphone out, and you hung it over the spotlight on the outside of the car. That way, if you got in trouble and you could get away from the fight or needed to get back and call for some help, then you could actually get back to the microphone without having to open the door and get back in the car and all. So, we didn't have a whole lot of backup in a rural environment. And, I learned to depend on myself and depend on my instincts a lot, and enhance my verbal judo skills and talking to people and being respectful to people as long as they wanted to respect me, So it was a different time back then. Didn't have a whole lot of equipment. If you wanted a bulletproof vest back then, you had to buy it. We provided our own guns, our own gun belts. I think I even bought if it wasn't during qualification time, I even provided my own ammunition, and we were, shooting. Everybody was shooting different kinds of bullets, and there was no standard bullet or anything like that for the agency. So, I saw those times now, and I retired back in 2016. So, got to see a lot of modernization going throughout law enforcement during my career. A lot of it, most of it for the good. Some of it, I don't know if it's for good or not. sometimes we rely on technology and stuff like that rather than getting back to the basics of really policing. And I think today's law enforcement officers lack some of the communication skills that previous generations had, because we have a generation now, the younger ones, especially coming on, now, that have been used to texting someone, or they're messaging someone on an app, or they're interacting with them via email, or whatever the case may be. And they're not used to talking to people on the telephone, or they're not used to having interpersonal communication between them and someone else. And I see a lot of difficulty in people conducting interviews or doing interrogations and getting confessions from criminals, because we lack those interpersonal skills. And I think that's something that really, really needs to be concentrated upon in police academies and in training after the academy too, is to develop those interpersonal communication skills.
Yeah, because when you're on a call, you're not texting with someone that's right in front of you. You have to interact with them. You have to be able to read their body language. You have to be able to, connect with them on an emotional level, for a lot of different reasons. One, it's for someone that has to be taken into custody, there's a compliance concern, right? Where you always want to. It's better to talk somebody into handcuffs than to force them into handcuffs, mm-hmm. because if you have to force them, somebody is getting hurt, right? And the average person does not realize how difficult it is to put somebody in handcuffs, even if you're highly trained. If a person doesn't want to go into the handcuffs, so those things, it doesn't look pretty, but sometimes you really got to elevate in order to do that, and that's for the safety of everybody involved.
Yeah, well, you see a lot of people out here in the public and media, and you've got 4 cops trying to arrest one individual. They're all on top of this individual and trying to put handcuffs on this and the other. It's actually safer for the suspect and the officers. The more officers you have, if you do a swarming technique correctly, to actually handcuff and restrain that individual, than it is one-on-one, because the officer doesn't want to get hurt. He's going to fight harder and do what he has to do not to get hurt and to get the subject into custody. So, it's actually safer the more officers you have if you perform it correctly. Now, the officer in Memphis a few weeks ago, they had 4 or 5 officers there, and I didn't want to see, them try to perform a correct technique in handcuffing that individual. That was interesting.
Yeah, and that's the that's the byproduct of a lot of different issues, right? And that's kind of where I was heading, is like, policing for all the people that see something like that, and the emotional response is policing is broken, it needs to be fixed. And that's while we tend to see these things, the media is going to pick up on those events, but you're talking, and I wrote this in a post not too long ago, but you're looking at, there's 800,000 police officers in America. There's over in the year 2021, I believe, there was an estimated 53 million police citizen contacts and interactions. And of those, less than 4% involve any type of use of force. And then it really, when it boils down to, I think last year there was 1,096 people that were shot or that were killed in these interactions with the police and these use of force interactions. And that seems like a lot, right? But when you start when you go back to 53 million contacts, and of those 53 million, 4% of 53 million, that's a lot of use of force. And to think that almost in every single one of those cases, there's no injury or very minor injuries, that tends to tell me that we're actually doing things pretty well. And it's basically and then you see the cases where there's an unarmed person. I think last year there was 27 of those. And of those, you had, 27 where they were unarmed. And again, the unarmed, you always have to keep in mind, there's always at least one gun in the fight when there's a fight between a police officer and a non-compliant suspect, because the officer always has a gun, and there's sadly every single year police officers die at the hands of their own firearm when they lose them in an altercation, and that's the reality of policing. But you're looking at point
just
0.000002%.
Yeah. Just because someone's unarmed doesn't mean that they're not dangerous. Okay, even with their hands, even with their feet, even with a rock that they could pick up during a struggle while you're rolling around on the ground wrestling one of these individuals and all. And I'm telling you, a lot of officers these days are really, really hesitant to pull their firearm and point it at someone, much less, actually pull the trigger. You see, there's instances, where we see where a lot of officers probably should have shot someone and they didn't. And maybe they ended up paying the price for it, or somebody else did. They would have been totally 100% justified in shooting someone, and they didn't do it because they're hesitant. And I think a lot of these officers, they're hesitant to perform their duties, whether it be putting their hands on someone or actually pulling a trigger if they need to, because of, number one, because of public perception these days in the last, especially since 2020, and also because of the leadership. They're not so sure that their leadership is going to back them up. I've always said you've got your people. You need to stand up with your people. If they do wrong, you need to stand beside them and take the hit and figure out what you're going to do to correct it. If they do something criminal, then you need to prosecute them. But we need law enforcement leaders in this country now who are more concerned about the mission than they are about their position. You see on a lot of law enforcement leadership, especially in some bigger locales, that are bowing down to their, liberal leadership, their city commission, their mayor, whatever the case may be. They're selling their soul to the devil. They're forgetting about what their principles were and what their convictions were and what they've done for years and years policing. And then they get some stars or bars on their collar or whatever, and they get in the head office up there, and then they forget all about it. And they're like, well, I've got to do whatever it takes for me to hold on to my position. It's not about the mission anymore. It's about the position. And I'll do whatever it takes to kiss up to the mayor, or kiss up to this commission or whatever, to make sure that I keep my job. I understand about people providing for their family and this, that, and the other, and people have to have a job. But, you've got to be a man or woman of your convictions. If you're willing to sell your soul to the devil, for something that you don't believe in, principles that at one time that you were against, it's time for you to go home. You need to quit. You're not doing law enforcement any good. You're not standing up for your personnel, and you're not fighting crime effectively either. If you're doing nothing but pandering to special interest groups or politicians.
Yeah, and I would say that goes both ways, right? It's there's plenty of examples out there where we've seen that whether it's a red state or a blue state, red city, blue city. I mean, right is right, wrong is wrong, and I think you said it about as simple as you can. As a police leader, it's no fun to have to try to hold people accountable to a standard that they won't hold themselves to. Right, they know it, and when they force that external accountability, it makes it harder for everybody. But there are also times when they're going to act in what they think is the right thing to do at that time. It's going to be within policy, and it may not look great, but that's you have to know the difference, right? And I think you're right. You have to learn to know when it's as a leader, it might be time to walk away if people are going to make you do things that would question your own integrity or put your own integrity on the line.
Right. Well, you also need to make sure that your personnel know what your mission is. They need to know what you expect out of them as law enforcement officers. They need to know, what is your doctrine, and what do you want to accomplish here with our law enforcement agency? What do you want us out here doing on a daily basis? There's a verse in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 14:8 says, "For if the trumpet gave an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself for battle?" You can't just, and you can't rely on your command staff or your supervisors and let this kind of trickle down to to your officers, especially in a larger department. You've got to make sure that your personnel know what you want to accomplish on a daily basis. What's your mission statement? What do you want to do? How do you want things done? And you can't afford to let them be vague about that. They need to know exactly what you want done. And not only, you can't convey that only through your words or through a memorandum, but you've got to convey that through your actions also.
And that's interesting too, because I think a lot of people don't realize the difference in it's all, I think, related. But when you, as a sheriff, you're an elected official. As a police chief, you're almost always an appointed official. And
Right.
An elected official, ultimately, you're still bound by law. Either you have law and policy that you still have to follow, but you're accountable to the voters. As a chief, you're generally accountable to a mayor, a city manager, a town board, a city council, whatever the local order of government is that appoints you to those positions. So, I do think there's good and bad to both, but it just, again, for the average American citizen, when they call 911, it doesn't matter if it's a blue,
Right.
a brown, or a green uniform that shows up at the door, right? They just want someone that's
Right.
going to help and help them resolve whatever the issue it is. But all those different organizations have little nuances in their structure that makes things different. And I think it works. All right. I think we can see examples of where it could always be better, but I'll go back and say, I think policing has never been better. I think the data shows that to be true, in terms of our part 1 crimes, our part 2 crimes, things being overall. We'll see some peaks in violence here and there. And we're going through one of those right now. I think when it comes back to some gun violence and issues, but it's still not like what it was in the mid 80s.
Yeah, we saw a lot of violence when we first started seeing crack cocaine in the mid 80s to late 80s and on into the 90s. But crack caused a lot of violence because it was a street drug. It was being sold in open air drug markets on the street, unlike some other drugs, and so saw a lot of violence all over the country.
Well, and the violence is, that's a downstream byproduct of a lack of enforcement, a lack of sound policy, and a clear direction on how you're going to address the issue. And I think you have a percentage of the population that says, well, the answer is just legalization, right? Because the war on drugs has been ineffective. And there are plenty of examples out there where we can say, sure, the war on drugs has been ineffective. Depending on what your measure of success is. and again, that's where we tend to go wrong, is we don't have a consensus on what are we actually trying to accomplish, because if you're going to say you're not a success because you haven't stopped any of the violence that's associated with drugs, well then you're never going to get to 100%, not as long as there's still people walking the earth.
Legalization is not the answer, in my opinion. And I've always said, the war on illegal drugs is a war that we'll never win, actually, but it's one that we can't afford to lose either. So you've got to be out there fighting it every single day out there in the streets. Legalization is definitely not the answer. I don't think anywhere that's legalized drugs, if you look at some of the studies, I've seen some stuff come out of Colorado, and even DUIs and DUI crashes and things like that as it relates to legalized marijuana. I think their court cases, their arrests are way up there in Colorado. And I'm sure there's some other studies that have been done also that's going to show that legalization is not the answer, and it's not making the public any safer either. And marijuana is a gateway drug. I don't care what anybody says. I had a guy bring his son to my office one day when I was sheriff. And the kid had really messed up. He was on some drugs, smoking weed. He'd sold some of his dad's guns and that kind of thing. And I took him over to the jail. and introduced him to an individual there in our jail. And this guy was a 3-time loser on methamphetamine. And he told this kid, he said, listen, he said, you know how I got started smoking meth and injecting meth? He said, I was at a party one night. He said, I smoked weed. He said, that's all I'd ever done. Previously was smoke some weed. He said, I was there one night, was pretty high on some weed. Somebody says, hey, man, hit this one time, see how you like this. He said, my mind was already clouded and I wasn't making good decisions because of, I was under the influence of marijuana at the time. He said, I tried methamphetamine. I've been an addict ever since. And this guy was looking at life without parole for multiple convictions of use and possession and trafficking in methamphetamine. So don't tell me that marijuana is not a gateway drug.
Yeah, that's a story that gets repeated over and over again. And for every 10 people that say I never had any issue, I smoked marijuana, it was no big deal. You're going to find one or two that's their story. And there's a lot that goes into it, but generally you're trading one problem for another. That's generally, and that's ultimately what communities need to decide is what they want to accept, what they want to tolerate. And you can't get sucked into these arguments by looking at the tax revenue. Think, let's look at all the money we'll make by taxing it and legalizing it. And I didn't even mean to necessarily go down this road, but I do think those are interesting discussions that, and in the end, the police, the police responsibility is to do what the state law says and what their communities say they want them to do. But yeah, if you're going to generate tax revenue, you're also going to create opportunities for misuse, and we saw a lot of that in Colorado and other places. Right? If you can sell legal marijuana out the front door, guess what? You can sell out the back. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and if you legalize it or not, organized crime is going to find a way to manipulate even a legal product. So you're still going to have criminal activity involved in it.
Well, yeah. So if you're in a state that's legalizing it, it's going to legalize it. Make sure you're setting aside about 75% of the revenue that you're going to generate to be able to clean up the mess that it creates. Yeah. And that's that's just we've got some pretty good data coming out, right? NHTSA and others have done some of those studies on traffic fatalities, DUIs, enforcement issues, treatment issues, treatment options. There's all those things become, they need to be factored into the equation. But I digress. So one of the things that you're doing now that I wanted to spend some time talking about was the program that you have that you're working with. It's called Bear the Sword. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing and what your mission is there?
I'd love to. Like I said, since 27 I retired. I've been working in the private sector. I work for a company called First Guard, and we provide off-duty cops for security projects all throughout the country for different corporations and individuals and other entities. But when I retired, I all of a sudden had this feeling, what's my mission in life? What am I supposed to do? There are no 911 calls to answer, no hostage situations or kidnappings, no disorderly persons, no accident scenes to go to, no cops to supervise anymore, nothing to command. So I'm sitting there wondering, what do I do now? And I missed all that terribly. And like I said, I still do. But I've come to understand this is something that God had given me and made me realize that my mission in life now is to let's inspire future generations of law enforcement officers. If we don't inspire future generations of law enforcement officers, where are they going to come from? What are we going to do without cops? There's a Latin term, and I would not even try to pronounce the Latin version of this, but I hear that it's inscribed on the Department of Justice building in Washington. I've never seen it before, but this term it basically translates into from law and order, everything else flows. If we don't have law and order, in our society, then what does it matter? What else happens? If you don't feel safe carrying your spouse out to dinner, you don't feel safe carrying your kids to the park, you don't feel safe going on vacation or driving to the supermarket to pick up some groceries. If you don't feel safe doing those things, what else really matters? What can we have in society? So you must have law enforcement. I kind of go back to Colonel Grossman's take on this. He said, you take away a generation of doctors and you're going to have more people die because of illnesses that those doctors could have treated or prevented. You take away the engineers and then you're going to have roads and bridges that are going to be crumbling, for a generation, and it's going to worsen driving conditions, and the buildings are not going to be as built as well or be safe. And you take away the teachers and we're going to end up with a dumb generation later on, less educated people. You took away the teachers. What if you took away all the cops? What do we have then? At that point, we have anarchy and chaos. So I think it's my job, and not only my job, but a lot of other cops and former cops, retired cops, mission to let's inspire future generations of law enforcement officers so that we'll have a steady supply of cops from now on to maintain order in our society. I really don't think that we can recruit cops anymore. You can recruit cops that are not called to be cops, but they're going to be individuals that are not going to be very fulfilled in their career. They're not going to live up to their potential because they're really not called to be a law enforcement officer. I've seen cops come, I've seen cops go, and I've seen a lot of cops stay, but you can always tell the ones that are called and the ones that are not. So, I've got a presentation, and a lot of it's based on some scripture. Romans 13:4 talks about the law enforcement officer in the Bible. As for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him who doeth evil. And that's what gives us our great commission as law enforcement officers. That's what tells what our job is. That's what tells the public what the law enforcement officer's job is. And, my goal now is to inspire future generations of law enforcement officers and law enforcement leadership. Like I said before, we need strong, dedicated, principled law enforcement leaders. And their job as law enforcement leaders, your job as a sheriff, your job as a chief, your job as a captain, lieutenant, all the way down, everybody that's got stripes on their sleeve or stars or bars on their collar, it's your job to create future leaders in law enforcement. So, those leaders need to be mentoring and nurturing the cops that are coming along behind them. A lot of people just don't care. They're like, well, I was a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, whatever the case might be. I retired. I got my pension, my retirement. I was there 25, 30 years or whatever. But what kind of legacy are you leaving behind? Are people going to be talking about you when you leave? Are they going to be saying things like, man, we're glad that guy's gone? We don't miss him at all. He was holding up a slot, that I was, could be promoted for. Or are they going to be talking about this law enforcement officer as this man or woman was a great officer. They were a great leader. They inspired me to be a better cop. And don't get me wrong, we can't make bad cops good cops, but we can make a good cop a better cop. And if we can make that good cop a better cop, then maybe we can make that better cop a great law enforcement officer or even a great law enforcement leader. But we've got to inspire them. And as cops and retired cops, we have to stop saying in the environment that we're in today, I wouldn't encourage anyone to get into law enforcement today. If nobody gets in it, then where are our cops going to come from? We're going to run out of that pool one day. And then what's going to happen? Not everybody is capable of defending themselves, their family, and their property. And we must have law enforcement as a deterrent. I think about no deterrent whatsoever out there. Even some good people are going to go over to the bad side because there is no deterrent. There is no justice. What are you going to have? You're going to have individual militias in certain areas protecting those particular areas of your community. I mean, I don't know who can think about a world where you would defund the police. I mean, look now, and I'll say this from experience. Most city commissions, county commissions, state legislatures, and Congress, they only fund law enforcement as a necessary evil. Okay, we've got to have law enforcement. We're going to fund them. Usually it's level funding. Every once in a while you get a little bit of an increase, but most of all it's just level funding. They're going to give you just enough to get by with. And then they're going to say, well, you got some federal grants, go and pursue these grants. Well, there are strings and things attached to grants. You don't always want a grant. And a lot of these grants are highly competitive also, and not everybody qualifies for grants. So, you got politicians out here that are not adequately funding police now. Then you're going to defund them or get rid of the police. I don't think that's a society that we want to see here in America.
No, I agree. And just had that. I know we talked about that on our pre-call a few weeks ago, but that's I was speaking to a group of law enforcement leaders at the Indiana State House and asked that very question. It's a question that I started asking back in 2015 when I presented with new chiefs in the state, and that to me, I think, is so telling for a lot of different reasons, but for all the reasons that you just said, right? Whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, whether you believe in God or whether you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in an order, and that that there is a collective good and there has to be collective rules in order for there to be good, then what that means is you believe in the opposite, in that you do believe in individual justice, and individual justice to you is going to look a lot different than your neighbor. And whether you like it or not. So, and that, people always, in everybody's mind, right? Everybody's the hero in their own story until they're not. And you're right. There are very few people in today's day and age that have the appropriate skills, level of training, that can defend themselves when evil, comes to their doorstep. And which is, where there's a lot of great irony there, in that the people that are calling for the defunding are generally the ones, that these calls are coming in communities where they need the police the most, and where the people that live there, are begging for the police, and yeah, and and it comes down to, we talked about this, I mentioned it earlier, right? It's as a police officer, as a police leader, right? It's no fun to try to have to hold an officer accountable to a standard that they won't hold themselves to. But in communities, the police are the people. The people are the police. That's the Pelian principle. 200 years. And if you have communities that aren't going to hold themselves accountable to a standard, no amount of police is going to get you out of that. I mean, there's just eventually you're going to be overwhelmed, and you're seeing that in pockets across America today.
We've got to have community support in order to do our job. Okay, just like we discussed earlier, the people are the police, and the police are the people. Actually, I got it backwards. The people are the police, and the police are the people. Sir Robert Peel come up with that way back over in England.
Right.
One of his 9 principles of modern policing. But we've got to have that public support. Now, never pandering to special interest groups or politicians, but we've got to have overall public support. We cannot solve crime without support from the public. You watch these people watch CSI and watch an hour, and they get all this evidence and get all this magic that they do in this lab, and all of a sudden they develop a suspect and that kind of thing. It just doesn't happen that way. I'll give you one example. Whenever I was a sheriff in our tri-state area here, we're right in the very southeastern corner of Alabama, our county borders Georgia and borders Florida to the south. So a lot of our criminals, especially burglars, would operate in 3 or 4 different counties, in 3 different states here. And we had a ring that was operating in our area. We had a burglary out in a rural area one day, and we went out to the crime scene, and our investigators could see where the vehicle had turned around in the yard, and they could tell that the front tires were a regular street tire, but the back tires were more of a mud grip or all-terrain tire. Okay, so that gives us a little something to go upon. Well, we get talking to some people out in the community and say, have you seen any vehicles today that are not normally out here in this area. Some of the older people that were at home all day and that kind of thing. And they said, well, I saw a white Ford Explorer out here today I've never seen before. So we got a little something else to go on. So we've got, it's like I like to say, we've got that 999 pieces of that 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle put together. And we just need that one little piece. And that person that we talked to that day gave it to us with that description of that vehicle. So my investigators got out and guess what they found in one of our local trailer parks? A Ford Explorer with street tires on the front, all-terrain tires on the back. We ended up pulling the people over after they left on a traffic violation, recovered some stolen jewelry, and ended up doing some search warrants. And I think solved like 27 burglaries, I believe it was. And so that's just an example of having public cooperation. We've got to have the public support in order to do our jobs, in order to solve crime.
And that's a true example of community policing right there. That's what it is. And I think today we see, in this digital age and this kind of this idea of social media influencing and influencers, there's a lot of examples out there where I think police leaders and agencies have missed the purpose in what community policing is. You can create an image, you can create a persona that shows the cops out there having the barbecues and doing stuff like that, but if the officers that are engaged in that aren't there because they want to be there, and they enjoy that for just the sheer relationship building, then when people see those things, it's like it doesn't ring sincere, it doesn't resonate with them. And more importantly, when the officers are back into those apartment complexes and neighborhoods and trailer parks and others, it's people aren't going to come forth and give you that piece of information. There was a white Ford Explorer. They'll let you drive by, or they won't answer the door when you go knock on it. And good luck trying to find the Ford Explorer with two different sets of tires on it when you don't know it's a Ford Explorer and you don't know what color it is.
But I think community policing, we talked about this on our pre-call, but I think community policing has kind of lost its way. I'm going to go back and kind of contradict myself on saying that's not our job, but there are certain tasks that some communities and some political leaders have come to expect from law enforcement that are not a law enforcement function. We just don't have the resources. Now, if you had plenty of cops, everybody was fully staffed, you had more people than you knew what to do with, and there was no crime in your area, building playgrounds and having cookouts and all that kind of stuff is fine. But we need to make sure that, first of all, we're performing the core mission of what law enforcement really is. And community policing, to me, and it goes back to that broken windows theory from back in the 90s, I guess. It may even originated prior to the 90s, but when I first came to know about it, there are quality of life issues that we need to address. And there are things we need to do, such as getting out in the community, walking through those apartment complexes and talking to the people while they're sitting out on their porches, stopping at a car wash while people are out working, stopping at the convenience stores and talking to people, or if there's a community event going on, stop and engage with those individuals. Let them know who you are. Hand out some business cards and that kind of thing, and just build relationships. Community policing is nothing more than really building relationships with the community that you serve, so that they can help you do things to serve them even better. So I think we need to get back to that core function of what community policing really is, and make sure that we're also fighting crime too. It's like a friend of mine used to say. So we're not social workers. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. But
it depends on the call you're on.
We just need to make sure that we're performing the core duties of what a law enforcement officer is first and foremost.
Yeah, and because that's how you get the information, and whether people believe it or not, right? We're in the information business, and that's
people are not going to trust you because you grilled them a hamburger. Okay, a lot of people is going to show up for free food. It doesn't matter if they're criminals or if they would like to get to know the police better, or whatever the case may be, you're not going to get information by cooking somebody a hamburger or a hot dog. Okay, you're going to get it by actually building personal relationships with these people out in the community.
Yeah, and I do think that if you have the right people out there doing that, then you will build those relationships, and it does provide opportunities. So, right, as administrators, and this is what I want. Especially political leaders and city councils and others. When you talk about defunding the police, those are generally the same people that want to have the cookouts and the barbecues, but there's always going to be a trade-off, because when your agency is 15 to 20% short in manpower, the 911 calls are still coming. The calls for service are still coming. So, while you might have officers having a cookout in one neighborhood, another neighborhood might not have officers showing up, until 2 or 3 hours after they called the police. And so what have you won there, right? You may have gained a little bit in one neighborhood, but you've lost trust in another neighborhood. And that's always the constant, battle that administrators are trying to, I'll just speak for personal experience there, right? We expanded our community outreach program in a time where, manpower was tight and calls for service are going up. Now, we also use some technology, and we made some changes in how we use data and information, and we were able to cut burglaries by 30%. We were able to cut our robberies by over 3 years. We cut our robberies down 60%, and that takes a lot of people pulling on the same end of the rope, and you need community support, you need political support, you need leadership support inside the organization, you need support from the line level officers, and you're not going to get it from everybody, because there's always going to be people that don't agree with the programs, the philosophy, and what you're doing. But if you're not doing it for the right reasons, right, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to lose on both ends.
Yeah. There's another very sharp two-edged sword there that you're teetering upon. Trying to keep the community engagement up, do your community policing stuff, and fighting crime. So, law enforcement, like I said, it's people call cops when they don't know who else to call. We're kind of a Swiss Army knife. Do it all.
That's a good T-shirt right there.
Yeah.
A Swiss Army knife with a thin blue line on it, right? All right, there you go. You can make that as part of your, well, maybe it wouldn't be a sword, right? We couldn't call it Bear the Sword. You could say Bear the Swiss Army Knife. Well, I did want to, it reminded me, I did want to say something, because what you're doing in terms of reconnecting with your passion and your purpose. You spent a career over 30 years in law enforcement, and you did it at the highest levels. We didn't even talk about some of the stories that we talked about on the call with what you did with SWAT and with tactical operations, and the way that you did resource allocation. All that stuff is so critically important. But you mentioned after you retired, there was kind of a disconnect from your purpose and your passion, and now you found a way to give back. And I was doing an interview in another episode that'll come out as an officer from Boynton Beach. He's retired down in Florida, down your way, but he goes by Keto 50 now. That's his on Twitter. He's an officer that 10 years into his policing profession, he got into a shooting. He was shot in the leg, got shot 3 times in a shootout with a bank robbery suspect. Wound up having, he started gaining weight, was, trying to manage the trauma and the PTSD that came with the aftermath of his shooting. But he eventually found a place where he through a nutrition change by just kind of a chance encounter with a friend that he was playing basketball with, kind of rediscovered a lot of these things and lost weight, got healthy, felt, kind of healed himself really. And now, and he made this crazy, just life choice here. I call it crazy, right? Because he's got 2 kids, wife, after he retires, they sell their house, they buy a camper, and they're literally living life on the road. Their kids are going through a online school. They're traveling the country, and he's like, my kids, he's like, they don't read about the 5 Great Lakes in a book. He's like, they're experiencing it. They're sticking their toes in all 5 Great Lakes as we travel around. And it's a long way of saying that he's got a movie that's coming out. It's called Cops and Campers. Look for it. It's coming out. And by the time this episode airs, for those that are listening, it should be out there. But he has this run-in with somebody in a park up in New York where they were camping when he flew his blue line flag and was told that he needed to take it down. And maybe you've seen this on Twitter, but not to get into that whole story. But what it winds up doing, it creates this story around him. He winds up being on Fox and Friends, and there's this huge national coverage about what he's doing. But more importantly, he got invited to a campground where they're having an event for police officers. And what he found was that in this community, there was a lot of retired officers that came up. Hey, it was great to hear your story. And they started connecting, and they started, reconnecting with their purpose, and they felt like what they had lost kind of when they retired. And he said the part where he knew he was onto something is then the spouses started coming up and saying, hey, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate this. It's my husband, my wife, they haven't been the same, since they retired. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but I think what you're doing is incredibly important. And I think, the generations that have come before us have so much to teach us about how to be better police officers today and what we can offer tomorrow. And again, that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about like a company like Performance Protocol, not just because they sponsor the podcast, but because I believe in their mission, right? We're going to take this executive development concept and we're going to take police officers from around the country and we're going to train them to be executive coaches and help the next generation of police officers connect with their passion, connect with their purpose, build a better police officer for the future. So how does someone, if they're interested in hearing your presentation for Bear the Sword, how can someone get a hold of you?
My email address is ahughes, that's HUGHES, 3801@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, Andy Hughes. I'm on Instagram. It's ahughes297, and I'm on LinkedIn also. Contact me on any of those applications.
All right.
Supposed to be coming up in October to Indiana. Matter of fact, I think I told you there's an event up there called Breaking the Barricade. I think it is. Jim Bontrager up there in Elkhart, Indiana, runs a big cop weekend up there. I'm supposed to be coming up there in October to speak, and I've got several other speaking engagements lined up. But there's 3 things, and cops need to find, like you said, you need to find a purpose after you retire. Make sure you have a purpose, whether it's involved in law enforcement or not. Some cops want nothing to do with law enforcement whatsoever. When they walk out their door,
they've had enough.
I don't even want to watch a cop show on TV. I don't want to do anything like that. And that's fine. That's fine. To each his own. But with Bear the Sword, there's three things that I want to accomplish with Bear the Sword. And the first thing I want to do is honor. I want to honor those law enforcement officers who have been killed in the line of duty. We want to honor their families. We want to honor the ones that have been disabled due to an on-duty incident. We want to honor those who have served 20, 30, 40 years in law enforcement and have honorably retired. The next thing I'd like to do is encourage. We need to encourage the law enforcement officers that are out there now. They're working hard. I mean, they're showing up to work every day. The call volume's high. The morale is sometimes low. They don't have a lot of cops showing up to work. They're understaffed, that kind of thing. So we need to make sure that we're encouraging our law enforcement officers that are serving today. And thirdly, we want to inspire future generations of law enforcement officers, because it's like I like to say in my presentation, it's kind of like the lyrics to an old George Jones song that I think about when I think about future generations of cops. And it says, who's going to fill their shoes? Who's going to stand that tall? Lord, I wonder who's going to fill their shoes. And who is going to fill their shoes? Who's going to fill our shoes? Law enforcement that are retired, the ones that are going to retire in the next year, the next generation, who are going to fill their shoes? We need to make sure that we're inspiring those future generations of good, ethical, constitutional law enforcement officers to serve the United States of America, or else we will have anarchy and chaos. We need to maintain our republic.
Amen, brother. I don't think I could say it any better than that. All right. Well, that's a perfect way to end this conversation. So you've heard Andy Hughes, retired sheriff, and his program, Bear the Sword.
It's A Hughes 3801 at Gmail.
Oh, okay. A Hughes 3801.
I really enjoyed being with you today. I enjoyed our pre-call conversation was like 2 hours, I think, 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it was.
This is an hour today, but I've certainly enjoyed it, and I'm always ready to talk about law enforcement. It's still my passion. It's still my purpose in life, and I'm always ready to talk with or about law enforcement and about cops. I love cops. I mean, there's nothing else I can say. I just
Me too.
have a passion for law enforcement. I love cops, and I want to see all of them succeed as law enforcement officers and law enforcement leaders. And one thing we need to realize too, and we talked about leadership a little bit. I know we're ending this thing up here a little bit, and I'm carrying on, but
that's okay.
People who are leaders in law enforcement don't necessarily have stripes on their sleeves or stars or bars on their collar. Anybody can be a leader in a moment where leadership is needed the most. So step up and be a leader.
And with that, have a great day. And until our next episode, 1042. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Patrick.